Good morning, Lakeview Follow Christian Church, and all our friends out there that like to come to Sunday school. This is a brief little Sunday school review of what we're going to have in the Sunday school room at the church today. So be sure and come up at 10 o'clock and join us for Sunday school, and 11 o'clock to join us for our worship services with Pastor Jeremy Little. And I really believe that you'll feel like that your cup's been filled up and that you've had a great Sunday and you felt like that you've worshiped. That's really important. You know, yesterday the men met and had a men's breakfast at the church, and I know that that's always a wonderful, enlightening time for the men to be together and to bond and to talk about things and to pray. And today is the women's ladies meeting. And we are going to meet right after church, and we're going to have lunch together, and then we're going to have the conclusion of Hinds Feet in High Places, which is the book we've been studying for quite some time. And we're going to talk about what we're going to do next, what's our next venture, and what we want to study. You know, I would like to ask some special prayers today, please, from all of you for the Hinds family. You know, Jacob Banfield, my grandson's partner in music, is Kellen Hinds. And you know, Jake and Kellen met when they played on AAU teams together back in high school. They're both really talented young basketball players. And yesterday, Kellen and Jacob were getting ready to fly back to Nashville when Kellen got the message that his grandfather and his uncle had both been killed in a boating accident on Lake Texoma. What a tragedy. Just breaks your heart. So please pray for that family, and please uplift them if you would, because it's such a difficult time. Okay, today we're going to start chapter 21 in class. And chapter 21 of Matthew is beginning the final week of Jesus' life. So it's the final period for Jesus on earth before he dies and comes back again on the third day. So this final week is chapter 21. Now, if you know Matthew, you know that Matthew has 28 chapters. So that tells you that the last portion of Matthew, which is a pretty good chunk of Matthew, is going to be devoted to the death and the resurrection and the final days as Jesus walked the earth with his apostles and instructed them before he ascended back into heaven. So what that tells us is that the book of Matthew is dedicated to telling the story of Jesus, and that this is a very important part of the Messiah's story. So, you know, as we start this, I want you to note that Jesus, where Jesus has been, he's been in the area called Galilee, of course, and he's gone over into Perea, which is modern-day Jordan. And then he turns and he goes upward toward Jerusalem. Now, the reason I say he's going upward is because absolutely the area he's coming from is about the lowest point on earth. So he's got to go up in order to get to Jerusalem. And so he's continuing on. If you noticed in the latter part of Matthew 20, the last thing he did is heal two blind men. And then he came to, it tells us in the first part of chapter 21 that he's going to come to Bethphage, which means house of figs in Hebrew, and that is at the Mount of Olives. And also we know from two other of the Gospels that it's also very close to Bethany. And Bethany being a village where Jesus had lots of friends, because that's where he had been in the home of Mary and Martha, and he had raised Lazarus from the dead there. Okay, so this beginning is going to be talking about Jesus' triumphant entry into Jerusalem. And let me just read to you the first 3 verses, and then let's talk about those a little bit, and that may be all we have time for today. So, verse 1 of chapter 21, as Jesus and the disciples approached Jerusalem, they came to the town of Bethphage on the mountain of Olives. And Jesus sent 2 of the disciples, on ahead. Go into the village over here, he said. As soon as you enter it, you will see a donkey tied there, with its colt beside it. Untie them and bring them to me. Now, that sounds a little odd because we know that the donkey and the colt are there. He knows they're going to be there. And he says, untie them and bring them to me. That's odd. I mean, wouldn't you want to knock on the door and tell someone, I'm taking your donkey and your colt? But this is pre-planned. If anyone asks you what you're doing, just say, the Lord needs them, and he will immediately let you take them. Now, Jesus knows everything. You know, we know that he knows everything. He knows that there's a donkey that's going to be tied there. We know that the colt is next to him. We know that if the person comes out of the house and says, hey, what are you doing, to the disciples, that all they have to say is the master needs them. And this tells us that it's very likely Bethany, because everybody in Bethany would have known about Jesus Christ and bringing a dead man back to life. Okay, now let's talk about what Jesus is doing. We know there's no real sudden decisions going on here. Jesus knows he's going to Jerusalem, and he knows that's where he's going to die. In these last days, the whole tone of the story shows that Jesus is carrying out plans which have been made in advance. How far in advance? Many, many, many years in advance. He sent his disciples into the village to collect the donkey and her foal. Matthew mentions Bethphage, but Mark 11 and Luke 19 also mention Bethany. It's very likely the village is Bethany that they're referring to, since Jesus has many friends there, and the phrase, the master needs them, would have been honored in a place where Jesus has many friends. So, Jesus rode into Jerusalem. Mark 11 and 2 gives details that the donkey had never been ridden before. It says, the exact quote was, and I wrote it down, on which no one has sat. This is a donkey colt on which no one has ever sat. And that's important. You know, we don't always get these things when we're reading these verses, because we just kind of skim over them. Oh, okay, well, in Mark it says no one has sat on the colt before, so what? Okay, let's talk about that just a minute. Animals used for sacred purposes were those on which no yoke had ever been laid. That's in Numbers 19 and 2. It's in Deuteronomy 21 and 3. Just think about it. The cart on which the Lord was carried, the Ark of the Lord, the Ark of the Covenant, was carried back in the Old Testament, had to be one which never had been used for any other purpose. And we know that because we read it in 1 Samuel 6 and 7. So are you getting the drift here? That the donkey is one that no one has ever sat on. This is something that's intentional, because it's showing that there is something very special about the person who's riding that donkey. This is an occasion that's sacred. And thus the fact that the donkey's never been ridden by anyone is even more of an emphasis about the importance of who's going to be riding it into Jerusalem. Everyone in Bethany had likely heard about Lazarus being raised by Jesus from the dead. And so Mary, Martha, and Lazarus lived there, and that's why Bible scholars believe that that is the place, the village, where this donkey was tied up. Now, how far is Bethany from Jerusalem? About 2 miles. And, you know, we've read before that Jesus has stayed, a lot of times, you know, that was where he would hang out rather than in Jerusalem. And so let's look at, we'll look at chapter 4 and 5 very quickly here, and rejoice greatly, O Zion. O daughter of Zion. What's the daughter of Zion? That's Jerusalem. And if you go back, this is fulfilling prophecy. This is in Zechariah 9:9. If you want to go back over to Zechariah and read it. And first of all, let's look at verse 4 and 5. It says, all this was done that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken by the prophet. What prophet? Zechariah. And in verse 5 it says, tell the people of Jerusalem, look, your king is coming to you. He is humble. He is riding on a donkey's colt. Zechariah 9:9, this is what it says. Behold, your king is coming to you. He is just and he is having salvation. So he's coming. This book of Zechariah was written earlier, 500 years. You remember how I said this is all pre-planned? Absolutely. Zechariah the prophet wrote 500 years earlier, before the birth of Christ, that foretold the uncanny accuracy that the coming of the Messiah would save the world of its sins. Please join us in Sunday school this morning and hear the rest of the story. It's a great story, and it's one that changed the world. The miraculous story of Jesus Christ, his death, his burial, his resurrection, and how he saved all of us through grace. Thank you for being with me this morning. Hope I see you in Sunday school. I love you guys. I'll see you later.